Burlesque by Kamari333. Chapter 3. Smells like LV. Red skipped his usual visit to the casino and went straight to the strip club. He was a few hours early, and he knew that, but he wanted to be there first. He didn't want this lust fellow getting the drop on him again. No, he was not going to think about how it was his own goddamn fault because he was a drunken mess the other night, not thinking about it. Red stomped over to the counter, rapping his knuckles a few times on the bar top to get the bartender's attention.
"Looking for someone called Lust. He here?"
Grilby flickered a bit, taken by surprise. Red watched him, listening carefully to the pops and crackles of his flames.
"No, he isn't here,"
those noises told him, mirroring the words the elemental spoke in common tongue a split second later. Red smirked.
"That's fine. Let him know the guy he's looking for is me. I'll be over there. And, send me over my usual."
Grilby nodded slowly, turning around to arrange for what Red liked. It was plain on his face that he wasn't too happy about Red having business with this Lust. Too bad it didn't matter. Bastard had his phone, and he wasn't in a financial situation to replace it, so he had to get it back. Red went and secured himself a table. A plush booth fit snugly in the corner, feeling that much more irritated. Why should he care what the nightlight thought? He shouldn't. It shouldn't bother him at all. But it did. He was used to that look, the look that showed fear for someone else, fear of what Red might do. He got it all the time, at work, on the street, in damn near every bar he'd ever drunk in. But this was the first time he'd seen that look from one of the fire elementals. Perhaps some part of him had held on to the naive, misguided thought that Grilby would never lose faith in him. That any Grilby would have his back when it came down to it. Red laughed humorlessly at himself. Yeah, fucking right. Not even the purple asshole he'd known for over a decade had that kind of loyalty. Why would this guy, who Red had only met last year at the earliest? Red blinked, staring at nothing as his mind, which was for once sober, started to tackle the puzzle that his inebriated mind had continuously put off since coming to the surface. Why were there so many Grilbys? He went rapid fire through all the possible explanations, each one more ridiculous than the last. Given, however, the little things that piled up now that he thought about it, he eventually reached the conclusion that the waitress brought over a bottle of bourbon, a bottle of mustard, and a shot glass. Red's thought process stopped dead as he took hold of the bottles and mixed their contents in the glass, then downed it in one go. He sighed, grinning as he felt the burn in the back of his skull. He could think about things later. Right now, all he wanted to do was drink. Lust pushed his way into the club. The silence of the night broke in the moment he opened the door and let the pounding of the hypnotic music beat into his bones. He smiled, breathing in deep the smell of liquor and sweat. Was it strange that he found it comforting? Perhaps, but Lust didn't care. He was hot and uncomfortable, and in all honesty, all he wanted was an ice-cold shower, then to snuggle up against someone warm and reassuring and go dead to the world. Fat chance of that happening. Putting on his best smile, Lust crossed the room, leaning on the bar and rapping his knuckles on the hard surface to get the bartender's attention.
"Hey, Grills. Anyone come asking for little old me tonight? I'm expecting someone."
Grilby turned around, looking at Lust curiously. His flames crackled, betraying his uncertainty, which he tried to hide with a bright, upbeat voice.
"Yeah, actually. One of my other regulars. Not the most savory of characters, but he pays his tab."
The elemental pulled out a bottle of whiskey and a tube of mustard, putting them in front of Lust.
"He'll probably be needing a refill, actually."
Grilby raised his hand to wave over the waitress. Lust took the bottles, chuckling.
"I'm heading there anyway, so I'll take them. Just send my usual on over when you can, okay, sweetie?"
Grilby blinked, then lowered his hand, pops and hisses indicating his own amusement.
"That's him, over in the booth. Edgy-looking fellow. Can't miss him. But Sans, be careful, okay? Something about him tells me he's not."
Grilby stopped, biting his lip as though he wasn't certain of what he wanted to say. Lust raised an eyebrow ridge, waiting a moment in case the bartender found the words, but he never did.
It'll be fine, Grobes. Oh, and put all his stuff tonight on my tab.
With that, Lust wove his way through the crowd and slid into the booth, to come face to face with the most edgy-looking monster he had ever seen. Sharp teeth like a shark's with one gold implant on his left side were spread into a grin that could far too easily be mistaken for something menacing. His single eyelight, glowing a vivid red, flickering and shimmering like fire in his left socket, was unfocused, wandering as though following some invisible object dancing in the air above the table. He was covered in a thin layer of perpetual sweat, to which his thick leather jacket was probably a contributing factor. The tiny fissures that radiated outward into his maxilla from his false tooth rose and converged into a paper-thin crack that bisected his left socket, stretching up to the top of his skull where it joined what looked like a mass of scarred calluses, where bone had grown and healed over what must have been an alarmingly large hole. It was healed over well, the discoloration hardly noticeable, and the cracks and fissures were so small that it would take a trained eye to see them at all. But Lust made bones his business and his pleasure, so he could discern easily at this distance that this monster had been hurt. And judging from the brief glimpse at his unguarded expression, in that tiniest moment before he registered that Lust was there, Lust could see that he had been hurt over and over, the best of him beaten and broken and scattered to the wind. What little he had left, he clung to tightly with all his strength. Lust envied that resolve. The other monster blinked at him, recognition evident on his face.
"You're Lust?"
he asked incredulously, a slight slur hidden in the softer consonants. Lust chuckled, setting the bottles down in the middle of the table.
"That's what they call me, sweetie,"
he answered, smiling as he looked the monster over a second time. He did look familiar. That's right, he was the heavy drinker with the hearty, inviting laugh. Lust had just never seen him up close before. What luck!
"So what should I call you?"
"Red," he muttered, snatching at the bottles and mixing the contents in a shot glass.
"Everyone else does."
The monster, Red, took his shot, the magic in his eye flaring briefly before settling back to its presumably default brightness. Perhaps it was less imagination, but the color seemed to become just the slightest bit murkier.
"You got my phone?"
Les nodded, pulling the device out and sliding it across the table.
"Right here, handsome."
Red snatched it up, flipping it open one-handed as he pieced off the mustard still gripped in the other. His eye sockets narrowed, an irritated growl escaping through his clenched teeth.
"About fucking time."
He snapped it shut again, stuffing it back into his pocket. He gave Lust one more look, then returned his focus back to what appeared to be his task of drinking himself stupid. Lust was not deterred. He noticed, as the seconds ticked by, that the ambience around Red, and by association himself, shifted, replaced with the looming presence of what Lust could only describe as power, a ferocity which Red seemed to shed without thinking. Lust's first instinct was to check him, to allow his second sight to dive into his depths, but as that power grew stronger, Lust found himself relaxing. The warmth in his body seemed to reflexively recoil from it, the burning ache that had plagued him smothered by a dominating force. Lust shivered in delight, reveling in the sudden chill, the relief. That wasn't intent to hurt. Lust knew that, viscerally, in a way he could only attribute to his uncharacteristically astute powers of observation. As much aggression as was seeping off of Red, there was not a hint of malice, of true desire to hurt anyone. It was intent to protect. Probably himself, if Lust was to take a guess. The waitress brought over Lust's martini, which he accepted with a smile and a wink. He chose to ignore the way her eyes darted fearfully to Red before she retreated from the booth a little too quickly. He couldn't blame her. He was willing to bet most people were probably scared off by Red's aura, unable or unwilling to discern the benign subtleties underneath the seemingly dangerous vigor. Lust took it as a challenge. Holding the delicate glass gracefully in one hand, Lust crossed his legs and leaned on his other arm, elbow on the table, wrist under his chin, and returned his undivided attention back to what he hoped was his new friend.
"So, you come here often then?"
Red put back another shot, then looked at Lust almost like he was surprised he was still there. Most people were scared off all right.
Yeah, every night for a while now.
He seemed to mull something over in his head.
What do you want? I ain't the type to leave a debt unpaid, so spit it out.
Lust sipped his martini casually, trying to hide his surprise. Did the guy really think that he wanted a reward for returning his phone? He got the feeling that denying it would just put Red even more on edge, so he thought fast.
I'm gonna let you off light, sweetie. Keep me company for tonight, and we're even.
He winked, which to his amusement brought a dusting of magic to Red's maxilla, tinting it pink. Maybe he had a chance after all?
Company I can do.
Red growled, although there wasn't much bite behind it. He sounded more tired than angry, if Lust was any judge.
But don't expect me to do nothing weird.
His hands were starting to shake ever so slightly. He put down the mustard bottle and tipped back the bourbon straight from the bottle.
Just good, clean fun.
Lust purred, knowing what he was getting at. Red slammed down the now empty bottle, bracing hard on the table as his skull swayed like he wasn't sure which way was up. The magic from his eye darkened even further, becoming even more muddy.
Yeah, fucking right.
Red grumbled, more to himself than Lust, before waving at the waitress casually. Lust didn't take it personally. He did want something more, after all, and it was probably written all over his face, as much as he tried to hide it. He watched the waitress bring over a refill for both Red and himself, letting his second martini sit untouched on the table as he continued to work on his first. Red cracked open his new bottle, diving into it without preamble. A little of the liquid seeped between his teeth, dribbling down his mandible and hanging there like drool. Lust swallowed, wondering if that was on purpose or some kind of unfair accident. Stars, what would he look like, really drooling, with his head thrown back, a deep moan escaping his gaping mouth? Lust drained his cup, setting it down and reaching for the other as he forced his soul to calm down. When Red finally set his bottle down, it was drained completely, and his eyelight was a reddish brown like the color of old bricks. He snatched up the mustard and chugged it before slumping forward on the table, breathing hard. He'd probably held his breath for the whole thing, so that was understandable. It didn't help Lust any, though.
So,
Lust asked, proud that he was able to keep the desire out of his voice.
What do you do for a living? Torment delinquents.
Red slurred, pulling himself back upright in his seat.
You?
He seemed to ask without thinking, right before a look of anxiety flashed across his face before settling back to irritation. Lust smiled.
I'm a chiropractor. I spend all a day handling bones,
he said with a wink. Red scowled back at him.
Must be a ton of work,
Red muttered, wiping the bourbon off his mandible with his thumb and lapping it up with his tongue. Lust grinned wider.
Yeah, it can be a skeleton, but I'm fine with it.
Red froze, his hand halfway down to the table from his face, his scowl only deepening.
Puns. Really?
Lust licked the rim of his glass, grinning as much at the other's face as his own joke.
If you weren't so intent on skulking, I bet you'd find them humorous.
Red snorted, his sockets seeming to narrow.
Puns are dumb as all hell. You want funny, old-fashioned jokes. Especially knock-knock jokes. Them's the shit.
He leaned back, smirking smugly.
For example, why'd the Temmie cross the road?
Lust chuckled.
I don't know. Why? To get to the idiot's house.
Lust blinked, not quite getting the joke. It must have been funny to some degree, though, because Red was snickering like crazy. Lust relaxed into his seat. Red's laughter really was nice. He had a nice smile. Well, now he knew what to do to make him laugh. He should use his best material.
I know a great knock-knock joke, actually. Really? Go ahead and tell it then. Alright, but you have to start it,
Lust said evenly, careful to keep his tone light and innocent. He had to play this just right, like he had with Toriel. Otherwise, the impact would be ruined.
Fine. Knock knock.
Red played along, crossing his arms. He still wore his smug grin.
Who's there?
Lust asked sweetly. He watched Red, expecting first a seize of his expression, the flash of expectation, then confusion, then realization at the true punchline of the joke, and finally amusement. That was not what Lust saw. Red grinned wider, a triumphant glint in his eyelight, which for the briefest moment flashed a brilliant crimson.
The Temmie.
Lust froze. Red was still and silent, his grin widening further, his implant glinting in the dim light. Lust stared at him, not quite certain what the joke was, and then he realized. Lust put his cup down, a grin breaking across his face so hard it almost hurt.
Oh, stars, I walked into that so hard I should have a concussion.
He giggled, covering his mouth.
How did...
Red snickered.
Nah, didn't plan it, but you sure made it easy to pull off. I was planning on nudging that in somehow later, but stars, your fucking face.
Red broke down into laughter, throwing his head back as he shook with it. Lust broke down into laughter of his own, encouraged by the infectiousness of Red's. It was hearty and full and genuine in a way Lust was starved for.
Okay, sweetie, round 1 goes to you. Let me try again.
The waitress brought another round of drinks, and Red jumped on his like the last one. He got it down by a quarter before pulling away grinning, his eyelight even more muddied. He held the bottle diagonally next to his toothy grin, mild amusement playing on his face.
Go ahead, sweetheart. Give it a shot.
Lust tried not to laugh at the unintentional pun, and upon failing, tried to play it off as leftover mirth from earlier. He thought a moment, then rapped his knuckles on the table.
Knock knock. Who's there?
The knock-knock jokes went back and forth for hours. Lust was a little rusty, but he thought he cracked them out rather well. Red certainly thought so, the way he was laughing. It made Lust's soul skip a beat, how he laughed, how even when his magic was muddied with inebriation, he would get that momentary spark of life, a brilliance that was certainly his namesake, for just a moment. Lust couldn't remember when he had felt so at ease just talking to someone. Not only did Red's presence drive away the ever-present burn, but with each joke, each laugh that was torn from him, it was replaced with a different kind of warmth, a gentle warmth that cradled him and soothed him from the inside out. The evening ended all too soon, Red having an early start the next morning, and before he knew it, Lust was once again alone in his cold, empty apartment. Lust hugged his pillow to his chest, disgusted with himself. How pathetic was it, getting attached to a stranger overnight? How desperate for companionship was he, that the slightest commonality made him swoon? Never mind how much they had in common, or how Red looked at him, or how stars damned wonderful it was to be around him. It didn't matter in the least, because there would never be anything between them. Lust balled up his fists, squeezing his eyes shut. His bones were already beginning to burn again, his magic surging insistently, demanding to be satisfied. But Lust wasn't in the mood, no matter what his body tried to say. He only curled up into a smaller ball, wrapping his legs around the pillow and snuggling closer, pretending he could smell leather and bourbon, praying for sleep. At least in sleep, he had peace. The knock-knock jokes went back and forth for hours. Red had to admit, when he first saw Lust, he couldn't believe it. This pole dancer, he said he was a chiropractor, although that didn't explain those shows, was the one who had ribbed him over the phone, who had taken his threats and laughed. He looked so delicate, so undamaged. It was hard to believe he was capable of looking Red in the eye, never mind holding a conversation with him. But he was, and fucking hell, it was actually pleasant. Red hadn't had anyone to throw jokes around with in years. Yeah, sure, Toriel was fun every once in a while, but their schedule didn't quite sync up, what with her teaching night classes at the local community college. Red understood why, but it didn't make it easier. Knock-knock jokes just weren't as good over text message. To make matters worse, his only real friends, if you could call the guys he hung out with on Saturdays to smoke with friends, were pun-loving idiots, just like his brother. Sure, sometimes he could steer the conversation to more tasteful and enjoyable jokes, like he had tonight, but usually it wasn't worth the effort because it would devolve into puns again in a matter of minutes. So imagine his surprise when this punny little bastard not only dived into the jokes, but kept at them. And not only that, but he was good. Red hadn't had a joke exchange like this since before he left the underground. That's why it was a shame the night had to end, but end it did because he had to work in the morning. Work which came and went without much fanfare or incident, leaving Red the usual level of drained and irritable that evening. Not that he could simply slink back to the bar and hide in another bottle quite yet. No, that would be too fucking easy. As Red made his way down the sidewalk, which the humans conveniently steered clear of, he checked his phone again. His brother had left yet another message reminding him to run his stupid errand. Go pick up the car from the auto shop. Red had been expecting it for a while, ever since Boss had gotten into that weightlifting competition with Undyne last week, which, long story short, resulted in an impressively damaged Lamborghini. And if you were being honest, having the impending headache that was picking the damn thing up hanging over his head had been driving him crazy. He was almost relieved that he could get it over with, except now he had to deal with the headache in question. Part of that headache was the fact that Red absolutely hated driving. Red snapped his phone shut irritably, stuffing it back into the plush pocket of his jacket as he rounded the last corner and approached the unassuming auto body shop. The garage door was pulled shut, obscuring his view of the inside where he knew the blood-red vehicle was now waiting. With a low growl, Red pushed his way through the glass-paned front door, setting off the obnoxious out-of-tune cowbell that served as the warning of a new customer. Red had been in and out of this place with his brother Carr on a semi-regular basis for years. Sometimes it was for a routine checkup, or an oil change, or some other equally reasonable and necessary maintenance that Red could care less about. Other times it was for something superficial and ridiculous, like the paint job. Boss kept switching between red and black, and at one point a brilliant chrome gold, or new rims. As a result, the staff had become quite familiar with Red and Boss, a fact which brought Red no small amount of irritation. Although, most things irritated Red. The human at the front counter, a muscular male in a ragged cotton shirt with various stains and a crooked baseball cap, grinned knowingly down at him. "Hey, Red, how's it been?" Red clicked his teeth, the joint of his jaw feeling tight. "Fine," he answered stiffly, doing his best to make his voice pleasant, but he knew his efforts fell flat, his dark tones tinged with vexation. "Here for the car, heard it was ready to go." The human kept his smile, although Red could see it was a bit more strained. "Sure is, we'll bring it out for you." He got up, heading back into the garage area. Red could hear his voice as he shouted, "Hey D, bring that baby out front. Red's here." Red twitched, going back outside, hands in his pockets, shoulders up like his hackles. This was another reason he hated having to pick up Boss's car. The large garage door opened before long, and out came the car, driven by a monster Red wasn't pleased he was familiar with. The skeleton in the driver's seat brought the car to a stop, getting out with a graceful hop. Red looked him up and down, taking in the numerous grease stains on his blue jumpsuit which hung off him as though he were made for it. The smooth planes of his face were tense, his eyelids trained on Red as though he were a vicious beast someone had let loose from his cage. The animosity was so thick Red could taste it. "Red?" the skeleton monster said, low voice impassive, eyelids focused. His smile strained as he stuffed his slender hands into the pockets that were situated around his hips. "Dance," Red returned, the blandness of his own voice broken by the undercurrent of hostility. He squared his shoulders, stubbornly reminding himself that assault was a crime now. The two held each other's gaze, eyelids unflinching, until Dance deliberately turned his head away, as if Red was neither a threat nor worth his time, and picked up a clipboard from the back seat of the car. He held it out, returning his steely, penetrating gaze back to Red. "She's all ready for you. Sign here, please," he said evenly. Red cracked his neck, using the cathartic act as a distraction from the awful pun. He took the 6 steps forward needed to close the distance between them, taking hold of the pen tucked behind the clip and skimming over the paper. It was the standard receipt and release form, which he had signed in his brother's place any number of times. His eye fell on the itemized list of what had been done, complete with the charges for the service. Fucking hell, car's expensive. $100 for changing the fucking brake fluid? I could have bought that shit for 10 and done it myself. Fluid better do it yourself next time, then, Dance responded deadpan. Assuming you can. Red growled. Red knew Boss wouldn't let him touch the inside of his car for whatever reason, not like Boss practically twisted his arm making him do every other fucking thing ever. It didn't matter what argument Red used, if Boss couldn't do it himself, he wasn't letting Red do it to his car, and somehow this aggravating grease monkey knew it. With a quick, violent flick of his wrist, Red signed his name, suppressing his desire to string colorful expletives in a chain long enough to choke the infuriatingly smug bastard before him. Dance, ever the professional, merely took back the pen and clipboard, dislodging the customer copy hidden underneath and handing it over.
"Thank you for your patronage. Please come back again."
Red snatched at the receipt, scowling so hard he worried he might crack something. Dance then stepped aside, letting Red climb into the driver's seat. Red couldn't get out of there fast enough, speeding off into the stream of traffic with an equally thick stream of creative obscenities. He needed a drink.
"Hey, D! Bring that baby out front! Red's here!"
Dance froze, his hand going still, hidden inside the rag he had been using to do some last-minute cleaning on the hood of the sleek vermilion 2X17 Lamborghini Aventador convertible that had been left in his care. He looked down, admiring the shine, the way his reflection was only the slightest bit distorted in the curvature of the hood. It really was a beautiful machine. The owner had good taste. Unlike the twat who always picked it up from the shop. With a long-suffering sigh, Dance resigned himself to letting the car go into the hands of the stubby gremlin he knew was undoubtedly waiting outside. He tossed the cleaning rag into a pile, running his greasy phalanges up and down the pants of his dull blue jumpsuit, adding another streak of stains to the fabric. He then snatched up the paperwork that he had snagged from the desk earlier preemptively and tossed it into the back seat before getting into the front. Dance carefully turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, purring with a heavy vibrato that only a machine, or a particularly fat cat, could hope to achieve. He hummed a few octaves higher but still harmonically, appreciating the musical quality before changing gears, both figuratively and literally, and driving the car slowly out of the now open garage door. As he got out of the car, Dance could feel the piercing gaze of the other monster like a physical force, making his soul shiver. He could smell the death that seemed to linger on him, the violence, the dust, could feel the cloying taint of LV from even this distance. It set Dance on edge like nothing else. He hated him, even if he didn't actually know more than his name. Dance turned stubbornly to look back at him, taking in the constant glow of his one eyelight, the sheen of his perpetual sweat on his skull, the set of his shoulders under his thick black jacket. He was certainly intimidating. The silence was oppressive, hanging thick between them, a manifestation of the animosity they shared for each other.
"Red?"
Dance forced himself to say, stuffing his hands in his pockets to hide how he was clenching them into fists. He tried to keep his voice pleasant, to keep his smile up, if only for the sake of keeping his job, but he could hear how his antipathy translated to apathy.
"Dance,"
Red returned, his voice dark with poignancy he had sweetened with forced civility, the strain of which was evident in the set of his jaw and the pulse of his magic from his eye socket. The two held each other's gaze, eyelids unflinching. Dance broke the stare, turning his head away to see what he was doing as he picked up the clipboard from the back seat of the car. He let his movements be slow, deliberate, allowing himself to postpone the inevitable before holding it out to the other monster. He once more looked Red in the eyes, not wanting him to think Dance would be an easy target.
"She's all ready for you. Sign here, please,"
he said, keeping his voice steady and light even though he wanted to growl. Red cracked his neck, lowering as he closed the distance between them. Dance had to force himself not to flinch, as Red's large claws came uncomfortably close to his arm, taking hold of the pen tucked behind the clip. The crimson glow focused, shaking and twitching as the monster took in the contents of the page before it flared with indignation.
$100 for changing the fucking brake fluid? I could have bought that shit for 10 and done it myself.
That's why the other 90 is for services, not that that's enough to deal with your ass.
Fluid better do it yourself next time, then.
Dance responded with as little emotion as possible.
Assuming you can.
He couldn't help but add. Red growled. It took every ounce of Dance's considerate self-control not to smile. He knew damn well that if the overgrown gnome were capable of tending to the car, he would be doing it. But for whatever reason, likely incompetence, if the bruiser had more than rudimentary literacy, Dance would eat his hat. He wasn't, which is why the car was here in the first place. Dance watched with no small amount of satisfaction as Red grudgingly scribbled what was probably his name in a messy, unintelligible scrawl. Moron probably couldn't puzzle his way out of a paper bag, let alone fix a car. Dance, doing his best to maintain his professionalism, took back the pen and clipboard and ripped out the customer copy hidden underneath. He held it out to Red, keeping his customer service face plastered on.
"Thank you for your patronage. Please come back again."
Red snatched at the receipt, a darkness creeping across his face that made his scowl look that much more menacing. Dance then stepped aside, letting Red climb into the driver's seat. As the angry monster sped off, remnants of vulgarities left in his wake, Dance cracked his back. He wondered if that nice chiropractor was having a better day than he was. Red was on his third bottle, sitting at his usual table in the strip club. It was a little after 9, earlier than usual for him to be there, but not as early as the night before. He sighed, sliding his fingers along the smooth panes of the bottle, appreciating the texture. Fuck Dance, fuck him, and fuck all those other judgmental sons of bitches who don't know two shits about anything but their own fucking... Knock knock. A familiar voice rang, punctuated by the gentle rapping of bone on wood. Red looked up, his blurry vision coming into focus, to see Lust sit down across from him, a genuine smile on his face. Red couldn't help but return it.
"Who's there?"
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, hit the like button to let me know and subscribe to see what I make next. Links in the description lead to the original fic posted on AO3, as well as my Patreon and Ko-fi. If you like my stuff, please consider supporting me. Every little bit helps. Lastly, if you have a request for a recording, whether a one-shot or a series, let me know in the comments. I also do commissions, details of which are on my Patreon. So keep in touch. Bye!